Hey guys, so I'm constantly being asked, hey David, how come you haven't made more solar videos? Well, the reality is I simply haven't made any changes to the system in the last year or so, and I haven't really had any update on anything to really talk about. Until now, I got a new project I want to share with you. In a previous video, I showed how I had mounted some panels to my side fence to add a little bit more solar power to my studio building. Now, these panels are facing south, which is just what I need. However, there have been a few issues. For one thing, the poles have been in the way, forcing me to space the panels apart. Another problem has been that during summer, the shadow from my studio building is right about here, which is fine, but in the winter, the sun comes at a more shallow angle, and the studio building will often cast a shadow right about here on the panels, making them completely unusable during the winter. Well, this fence is 15 years old and it's crooked as can be, and it's beginning to fall apart. So I have taken the panels off. As you can see, the fence is being demolished. The idea here is that the new fence will have the poles on the other side, thus giving me the flat side to work with. Now, I really wanted to mount these panels vertically so that I could squeeze more of them into the sweet spot where I get the most sun, and raise them up so that we'll never be hit with the shadows even during the winter time. But I also wanted to be able to rotate the panels up to 90 degrees like this, so I could pick the best angle for the sun and still be able to fold them in when they're in the way. Now, I've seen panels that come with adjustable mounts like this, but they tend to be for really small panels like this one here, which is just 50 watts. And they also tend to be designed to mount to a horizontal surface, not a vertical one. So for this, I need to design some sort of hinge system here, along with some sort of support rod here, and then some sort of track it can move on down here. And for that, I enlisted the help of Kai, one of the team members at the arcade, who is also really good at 3D modeling and printing. And they brought their 3D printer over to the studio, and we worked together on some various ideas. Initially, everything was made out of PLA just for test fitting things. The final parts will be printed in ASA, so it's better suited for outdoors. I also thought, while I'm at it, I should probably order 2 more panels, so I could increase this to 8. Since these are 100 watt panels, that should put me around 800 watts max on the fence. But in the meantime, I wanted to test these prototype parts we made and see how they work. Now, first thing I did was mark the holes for these little pucks that go on each side of the panel. Then I'll drill the holes, and by the way, these are just aluminum frames on these panels. It does not hurt the panel in any way to drill holes in the aluminum, as long as you stay away from the panel itself. Okay, time to screw in the pucks. Now, the way this should work is the left hinge joint will slide on like this, and what I have here is actually a dual joint. It's twice as wide, so it can support a panel from both sides. Now, I can't use the side fence as it's under construction, so just for testing, I'm going to use the back fence. I get absolutely zero sunlight back here, but that's okay. It's just for testing the mounts. Now, I'm not even going to use a bolt on this. I'm just going to screw it in temporarily. There we go. Now let's mount the panel. And this does look very promising, but as the new fence was starting to be built, I did realize a couple of new problems to deal with. I was imagining a straight fence where the panels would be even, like this, and I could even use those double width mounts in between 2 panels. However, the fence on the side of my house is at a gradient, more like this. So that means the panels will not be lining up horizontally, so I don't think I'll ever be able to use the double width mounts. And so I also need some sort of spacer to help me raise up one side of the mount to make it level. So Kai came up with these, which I think are pretty brilliant, so I can just add as many of these as I need to raise one up on the side. Speaking of, the new fence was now complete, so at this point we started printing the main hinge pieces out of ASA, and even though we haven't quite figured out the bottom section, I figured we could start hanging the panels on the fence. So here goes the first one. Obviously, I need to check if it's level, and clearly it isn't, and so that's where our little spacers come in handy. Now this time I'll be using actual bolts that go all the way through to the other side and will be attached with a locking nut. Here's the first panel. Since the adjustable support design isn't finished yet, we're going to be holding these in place with little barrel bolt locks. So the one side is attached to the back of the side panel like this, and the main lock will get screwed into the fence like so. And as you can see, this keeps the panel from moving, but I can also unlock it and test at different angles. Just at the moment, there isn't anything in place to hold it at the angle I want.
Okay, so I've been looking for some sort of way to be able to both lock these down and be able to lock them at a particular angle, such as this. And I've looked at about a dozen different ways of accomplishing that. They all have compromises. The easiest way to do it would simply be to take a piece of aluminum flat board like this, screw it into the side of the panel somewhere wherever you want, and then mount that to the fence, and bam, you've got your panel locked in at a particular angle. The trouble is, I want to be able to do this quickly and easily without having to unbolt a bunch of stuff. For example, if I know there's a thunderstorm coming, I don't want to have to come in here and spend 10 minutes on each 6 of these panels in order to lock them down for safety. So I want to be able to do it quickly. So I'm still investigating what the best option would be for that.
I got to test the panels the very next day, but not for their solar production, but rather how they handle a thunderstorm. We had some 40-mile-per-hour winds, and they did just fine, but time will tell how they handle 80-mile-per-hour winds, which we do get from time to time. The next 2 days, we got some sunlight, and one of the things I did was to unplug everything from the EcoFlow system except for the fence panels. I wanted to see what sort of power I could get at various angles, and I could watch it live on my phone as I moved the panels. But more to the point, with 4 panels installed, I found the optimum angle would produce 409 watts, and if I locked the panels vertically, they only produced around 161 watts. Likewise, I left the panels the whole day and let EcoFlow tell me the entire day's production, and I produced almost 2.5 kilowatt hours, versus the next day when I did the panels vertical, I only produced just under a kilowatt hour for the day. Now, I've added the last 2 panels, so now I have 6 of them to play with. Now, for those that are immediately wondering how my neighbor over here feels about this, that's a valid question. And in my case, it's my dear old mother, and she never goes in her backyard and doesn't care at all about my panels. However, if you're thinking about doing this, you definitely want to double check with your neighbor. And yes, I plan to tidy up these cables, but my wife is wanting to stain this fence here shortly, and so I'm waiting for that to happen before mounting all of the wires.
So there's essentially 2 different ways you can think about the usage case for panels like this. One way would be the default, just leave them locked down like this all the time and be satisfied with the 38 to 40% efficiency that you're going to get. And if that's not enough power, you could always consider adding a few more panels in order to make up the difference. And then during an emergency power situation, you could rotate them and lock them up as needed, and you would get roughly a little more than double the power output out of them. The other way of looking at it would be to leave them locked at an optimum angle all the time, and then you would have to come out here and move them down if you know that there's bad weather or something else that needs to be, like when the mowers come and they're not going to want to run into these things, for example. So like I said, there's 2 different use cases you could think about it.
Now, some people may be scratching their heads at this point and thinking, why do a solar fence in the first place? Well, in my case, if you look at my backyard, there just really isn't any spot that gets any decent amount of sun. I mean, most of this area you see gets maybe 2 hours per day. The roof on the studio building has so many angles, there's only one place panels could actually be mounted, which is the backside, but it only gets about 1 hour of sun per day. So, heck, even the panels I have on my pergola generally don't get more than about 4 good hours of sunlight per day. So it just so happens the fence area is really the best place to put them. However, I've talked to dozens of people who have various reasons for putting panels on fences. No, it's not ideal, but in most cases it's done out of necessity. Oh, and by the way, if this fence faced east and west, I'd probably rather go with a design like this using bifacial panels where the panels are actually part of the fence. I just don't think this would work so well on a fence facing north and south, unless, of course, I was much further away from the equator. This episode is sponsored by me! If you like the kind of videos I make, consider visiting my website and taking a look at some of the merchandise I offer. I have mouse pads, t-shirts, tumblers, keychains, vinyl records, and some of the games I've developed over the years. I've started to post a number of items from my collection that I no longer need anymore, including hardware and software, so be sure to check out that too. Okay, so here's where I got stuck for a couple of weeks. So I was working on this elaborate design with these little ladders. Now, the way this was going to work was the solar panel was going to attach, like here, you can see it's on like a hinge, and the solar panel will be able to latch, wherever you wanted. And it's really good at holding the solar panel with downward force this direction, but there's nothing to really stop, for example, the wind from lifting the panel and lifting it right out. So I was going to counter that with putting some big springs on each side of the panel to give it some inherent downward force so that it would always be kind of pushing into the ladder a little bit. And then I was going to have multiple of these, like maybe 2 or 3 of these ladders on top of each other so that you would have multiple different angles that you could adjust the panel to. This, I mean, it probably would have worked, but I kept thinking to myself, there's got to be a simpler way to do this. And eventually it occurred to me there is, and I could just use the same barrel lock designs I had already been using to lock the panels to the fence. So let's take a look at what I did. So now I have 3 of these locks here, which gives me 3 different angles I can lock the panel at. And if I want to lock it down completely, then I could just rotate the bar down parallel with the panels like this, and then lock it on the other side. So I got busy cutting more aluminum angles so I could finish all 6 panels with this design. I also found something to help organize my wires a little better, which is this monster here. Now, one issue I'm going to point out is that I am now significantly over-paneled on this setup, so I want to talk about that a bit. Now, first of all, what does it even mean to be over-paneled? Well, imagine this is the production curve for your day. In an ideal system, your charge controller limit would be right here so that you're taking full advantage of every bit of power your controller can handle during the peak of the day. Now, if you add more panels, the curve would look more like this. It would flatten out at the top because it just can't go any higher than this, and so you'd be missing out on all of this production that theoretically the panels can make. Now, this sounds pretty pointless, right? Well, believe it or not, I have 2 more panels on the way because I will eventually be upgrading the fence to 8 panels total. And if I'm already over paneled, that seems crazy, right? Well, not really. You see, if you overlay that first graph, you'll notice that there's a considerable amount of extra power being made during the non-peak hours of the day. And so I'll be making peak power for a longer period of time. But more importantly, imagine this is a really cloudy day, and this is all you'd normally make that day. Well, with the extra panels, you would have a considerably better day of production in this case. So what is my goal here? Well, there are times of the year, usually spring and fall, that I can run this building for days or weeks on end with only solar power. The catch is the temperature needs to fall between about 60 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. However, the temperature here can vary between about 10 and 110 degrees. Granted, those extremes are not that common, so my goal is just to expand this window a bit where I can stay completely off-grid from a wider temperature range, and thus the need to switch back to grid power far less often. And I think this new solar fence will do that for me, assuming it holds up to the weather, and that remains to be seen, of course. The last thing I needed to do before putting all of this to the test was to make some custom length wires and try to tidy up all of the wiring so it is a bit more elegant. All of my years in IT helped me prepare for this. And here's what it looks like now. Oh, and I do still have some more barrel locks to install. If you're wondering what that excess spool is at the end, well, that will be for panels 7 and 8 when they arrive. Before my big test, I need to clean these panels on the pergola. This is what a year without cleaning looks like. I found that a good cleaning will often render a 20 to 30% power boost, which, by the way, is one huge advantage of a ground mount solar, including my fence panels. They are easy to clean, which is not only good for power production, but also in an emergency scenario, for example, when the panels can be covered in snow. And if the grid is down and you want to be able to make some power, it's helpful to be able to clean the snow off. Incidentally, if I know snow is coming, I can always lock these in their vertical position to prevent that. So let's take a look at our first full day of sunlight. So looking at the EcoFlow app on my phone, it shows the total power here, but down below it actually breaks it down further. This is the input from the large panels on the pergola, and the fence is connected to a separate charge controller down here. And so one thing you'll notice right away is that in the morning here, the fence is already producing a decent amount of power while the pergola is making 0. That's because my neighbor's trees block the sun to the pergola until afternoon. Unfortunately, when I look at the production graph for the whole day, it combines all this together, so I can't really see which panels are doing what. However, if we follow throughout the day, we can get a pretty good idea. So if you look at just around an hour later, we can see the fence is making even more, and the pergola is just starting to get hints of sunlight. Skipping forward to afternoon, you can see both are producing well, and we're making 1.5 kilowatts of power, which is great. And this carried on for several hours until this happened. Yep, I hit 100% on the battery. So this is both good and bad. It's good because I've been running on solar for over 24 hours, and if I'm able to hit 100% battery every day, that means I can run completely off grid, which is sort of the goal. It's also bad though because it means solar production stops when there's nowhere for the excess power to go, and thus I don't actually produce as much as I technically could. In fact, looking at this production for the day, you'll notice a sharp drop off right there. And you might think that's because of clouds or some shadow or something, but nope, that's just because we were stuck at 100%. My guess is I could have produced 8 kilowatt hours or more if I had somewhere for the power to go. And by the way, it was 80 degrees today, which is pretty mild, so I'm going to have to wait a few more weeks for the temperature to shoot up so I can really put this to the test. Okay, so I got one more thing I want to share with you guys. I've been waiting like a year to tell you about this. It just wasn't important enough to do a whole video on the topic. So have you ever seen, I don't even have to ask, I know you've seen, like when you go on social media, there's always some clickbait advertisement that says, lower your energy bills with this one trick, or, lower your insurance costs with this one trick, or whatever it is. It's always this one trick, right? And if you click on it, it's usually some sort of pseudoscience nonsense scam or something like that. But in this case, it's actually real. I really did actually lower my energy cost by quite a bit using one trick. And it wasn't even my idea. It was actually something that many of you guys had suggested in the comments section of one of my last solar videos. Many of you said, hey, David, why don't you try a time of day plan? And I looked around and sure enough, I found one. In fact, the plan that I'm using now is called free nights. So basically after 8 o'clock, my electricity is free until 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, the way the electric company makes money off that plan is they charge you a ridiculous amount during the day to try to make up for it. But in my case, I can work around that pretty well. So, for example, we have 3 electric cars in the house, and I set all 3 of them to charge after 8 o'clock. So, I mean, I can plug them in at, say, 5 o'clock, but they won't actually start charging until like 8 o'clock. The other thing that I can do, believe it or not, with the smart panel that I have in my garage, I can actually set my EcoFlow system to start charging the batteries at 8 o'clock. So of the actual EcoFlow system. So that way, when 6 o'clock rolls around in the morning and we switch back to paying for electricity, I have a guaranteed full battery and I have the solar panels to produce, supplement even on top of that. So that means I can go most of the day and in most cases without using a whole lot of grid power. Now you might think, well, does that mean I'm paying zero for my electricity bill? No, I'm paying usually between $100 and $200 a month now. But considering before I started all this, I was paying like between $300 and $600 a month. That's a big win, especially considering how small of a setup that I actually have compared to a normal residential solar setup. So anyway, that's the one trick I wanted to tell you about. It's something you might consider if you have that as an option in your area. But other than that, that's it for this episode. So as always, thanks for watching.